Do you always forget Valentine's Day? Well, this week and next, I'm going to show you how to make a carnation and lilac arrangement to show that special someone just how much you care. Let me show you how. Hey, this is Alexandria from Finespun Cakes. If you are new here, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on more videos just like this one, and give me a thumbs up too. And before we get into it, tell me in the comments below, what is the best Valentine's Day gift you have ever received? Let's get to the video.
We'll start with 20 gauge wires, and we will cut these into thirds using a pair of needle nose pliers or wire cutters. Next, you'll hook one end of the wire and close the hook so that we can create a Gumpaste center or a base on which to build our carnation. You'll need one wire for every carnation or a carnation kind of bud that you're making. Next, I've just got some plain white gum paste, and this is my recipe as I usually use. I will link to that in the description box below if you don't have it yet. So I have about a blueberry sized piece, and I'm rolling it into a tight ball, and then I roll it into a cone. Next, I'm going to check the sizing on the smallest cutter that I'm planning on using for the carnation. And this looks a little too big still, so I'm just going to tear a little piece off and make it a bit smaller. So what you want is for the base of the little teardrop bud that you have to be placed right in the center, and the tip to be right at the edge of one of the petals. So that's how you know you have the right size. This looks much better, so we can go ahead and attach that to the wire. Just dipping the end of this wire into some gum glue, wiping off the excess on my hand, and inserting that into the wide part of the cone. Just pinching it closed to make sure it doesn't go anywhere, and smoothing out the base. Then we can just reshape it as necessary, then allow this to dry overnight before we begin our carnations. I'm using Claret gel coloring from Gel, and this makes a really nice kind of deep fuchsia pink color. And this was just white gum paste that I added the color directly to. And I'm making sure to give it a really good knead, and I will work with about a handful at a time. So first we will roll this, and then we're going to pass it through the pasta machine to a number 5. This is a little bit sticky, so I'm just adding a touch of cornstarch so it doesn't stick to the pasta machine rollers, and then I'll go ahead and pass it through. Once the gum paste has been passed through the pasta machine, it's going to be super nice and thin, and we're ready to cut it out. So I'm starting with the smallest cutter here, cutting it and just rubbing it on my palm to get a really nice clean cut. You will need to cut out 2 blossoms of each of the 3 sizes if you're making a full-size flower. If you want to make a bud, you only need to cut out 2 of the small ones, and if you want to make a medium-sized flower, then you can cut out 2 of the small ones and 2 of the medium ones. I hope that makes sense. I'll try and explain a little bit more as we're creating the actual flower. These are my 2 small blossoms, so I'm just stretching out those petals a bit using my large ball tool and thinning out the top edge as well. I do have a previous carnation video, which I'm going to link to in this video and also in the description box below. And in that one, you can see how you can use a gradient effect to get just a different coloring option. But for these really nice bright fuchsia ones, I wanted it to be bright all over. So we're using the same color for all of the petals. Once you finish thinning out the edges, then you can bring that to the edge of your mat and grab your veining tool. Press that back and forth. More pressure on the outside of the flower, and put a bit of shortening on it if you find it sticking at all. And then just continue with the remaining petals. This is really what gives the carnations that texture that we all know and love on carnations, or maybe you don't love it. You can tell me in the comments below what you think. But yeah, the veining tool is really key here to get the right texture. I'm going to be running a 5-day sugar flower challenge, and I really hope you'll join me. It's going to be free leading up to my peony course launch. And what we're going to be covering is 3 different flowers and 1 type of greenery, plus dusting, assembling everything. So if you really want to up your sugar flower skills without purchasing tons of different equipment and veiners and cutters, please join me there. I would really love to see you. And we're going to be building a little sugar flower community over the 5 days, so please join us. I will put all of the details in the description box below so you can check that out. If you've observed any carnations before, you'll see that they have almost jagged edges. So we're going to create this using the Dresden tool, using the thinner side because it does give a bit of a pointier tip, so it's easier to make a more jagged edge with it. And this also enhances the texture, just makes it look more realistic. Try and keep all of these Dresden tool marks going in generally the same direction as your veining tool marks. Flipping those over and grabbing your ball tool, we're using the medium ball tool, and we are going to cup the petals inwards in 2 different spots. This just helps give them a better texture when you are kind of ruffling them onto the bud, the center. You'll see what I mean once we add it on. So on 1 petal, add a bit of gum glue to the center, and then add the next one on top, making sure to stagger the petals so they're not overlapping directly. Give it a gentle press and then add more gum glue onto the center and then onto 1 petal completely. So you want a thin layer, not too thick, but definitely 1 petal needs to be covered entirely. Thread that flower onto your wire, and the 1 petal that is covered completely, you are going to wrap it around the center just so that you can make sure it's covered and you won't see any of that white. Next, you will begin to pinch the petals together as you attach them. So you can see here why we did the cupping motion. The petals almost fold in on each other in a more gentle, kind of curvy way, as opposed to being sticking straight up, which we wouldn't want. So once you've pinched them all together, they should be sticking fairly well. If not, add a bit more gum glue. And make sure this is nice and tight because we always want the centers to look fairly tight on carnations. This just helps the inner petals look like they're really still nice and fresh. So we'll just hang that upside down as soon as I'm finished with it and move on to the next size. So the 1 size we just finished, if you want to make a small carnation, it's like just starting to bloom, that is all you have to do. And then you will see at the end, we're going to add a calyx on it. If you want to make the medium one, this is when you will use these medium-sized petals. So I'm doing exactly the same as before. I'm thinning the edges with the large ball tool. And again, you'll bring those to the edge of your mat in order to vein them. Always making sure to add more pressure on the outside of the petal so that it can get really nice and thin. Grab your Dresden tool and then give it that kind of jagged texture again. And as you work outwards on the medium or the large size petals, I would give them a little bit more texture as you go out, just because the petals are a little bit older, so they've had more age and possibly damage from the wind or elements. So just something to keep in mind to make it look a little bit more realistic. Cup those petals inwards, again using the medium ball tool, and then I switched to the large one because these petals are fairly large. Paint your gum glue into the center of 1 petal and then add the next one on, making sure those petals are staggered, and then you can add your gum glue onto the center. So this has had a chance to par dry. You can see the petals are staying straight up now, which is exactly what we want. Thread that on and begin pinching the petals together to gather them. So you don't want to just press the petals on flat because then they won't have enough ruffling kind of texture as a carnation does. You definitely want to give them some kind of pleats at the bottom so that they fold back and forth. So if you are making a medium-sized flower, this is exactly where you can stop and then just go on to the dusting, but we are going to finish off with the large petals so you can see what that looks like. But I am going to first allow this to par dry just for a few minutes so that those petals can be sturdy enough to handle the next layer. So finally, we are onto the large petals. And I will link all of these cutters and the colors and everything, all the tools, equipment, etc. in the description box below so you can check that out. So really giving this a good thin because as I mentioned before, as the petals move outwards on the flower, you do want them to have a bit more damage to them. And then using your veining tool, give it a really, really good texture, really good press. If you don't find it's enough, you can just go back over it again. It's no problem. So as I'm veining, hopefully you can see that really nice damaged edge. It actually almost got a little bit dried out, but it's perfect for the carnation. Again, grab that Dresden tool and really give this a lot of texture. Make those edges super jaggedy, just like a real carnation. So we are at the cupping stage and I'm doing these in 3 different sections instead of just 2 as I did before, just because these petals are larger so they can take a little bit more. And then grab your gum glue, put a bit in the center and up the petals a tiny bit just so they're easier to stick on. Especially as these petals get larger, you want to make sure that they are secured. And then I've added the next layer, giving that a good firm press, and then adding the gum glue in the center. So you can see the medium layer is really nice and par dried. The petals aren't going anywhere even when I bring the flower vertically. So this means it's good to go. I'm going to thread that on. Thread those large petals on to the blossom. And then make sure to pinch these as I attach them. And if you find your petals are just too unwieldy and floppy, you can go ahead and pinch them holding the flower sideways or even upside down if that's easier for you. And I am giving these a really nice good twist, any of them that look too flat, just because this is what the carnation petals do. They're very twisty and ruffly. So we want to mimic that in the sugar flower. Next, I will allow this to dry upside down until it's par dried as the previous layer was, so the petals aren't moving around on you. But after that, we are going to bring the flowers vertically and we are going to dry them just like this in a piece of bumpy foam so that the outer petals can really open up and get that fluffy look, just like you can see here in the dried flowers. So these are my 3 sizes of carnations as well as the lilacs, which we are going to be making next week, and then we're going to arrange them together. But first we'll be dusting. You'll need deep pink, claret, peony, and stargazer. Let's start with some of the deep pink, and I did already have some dust on here from dusting lilacs before, so I'm just mixing it in because it was just a bit of that peony. It'll just add a bit of softness to the pink that we're making. So first I added the claret and the deep pink together. I'm going for a shade just darker than the Gumpaste that we currently have, which is that really nice dark claret pink color. So we want this to be in the shadows and also on the edges, just creating more depth and texture. So it wasn't dark enough, I'm adding more, and then eventually I'm going to add some of the stargazer because it still wasn't dark enough for my liking. I'm using a small soft brush for this because I don't want to break too many petals. I did end up breaking some, but it was not a big deal. But if you do use a larger brush, you can definitely run the risk of breaking more petals than you want. So I'm just inserting that brush wherever I can with the dust to accentuate the shadows and create more depth. I find with a lot of pink flowers, they can end up looking super flat because people don't dust them dark enough in the shadowy areas, so it just looks like a piece of pink plastic, which of course we don't want. We want these to look like real carnations. So just make sure to choose a dust that is dark enough to add some extra character to your flower. And this is when I decided to add the stargazer because I still wasn't happy with the color. So don't be afraid to adjust and make changes as you go. You don't have to be stuck with one color just because you made it. So let's try this again. Brushing into the crevices, and I was definitely much happier with how this looked. It's kind of hard to see in this lighting, but it definitely was adding a lot more depth than the previous color was. Now we'll be dusting the medium flower in exactly the same way. I would say as the flowers get smaller, I do tend to add a bit more dust just because the colors are more concentrated at the beginning. But feel free to do whatever you want, like take a look at some flowers and some buds and see what the shade you're going for looks like. Just try and get a better gauge of how dark it should be. The dusting aspect and coloring in general is something that we really go into depth with in the peony class, talking about how to choose the different Gumpaste colors and how to choose the correct dusting colors to go with it. So I hope you'll join me there. I'm going to link to that in the description box below. And finally, we'll dust our smallest flower. This is kind of just a bit bigger than the bud. So I am giving this one quite a bit of the dust, especially on the edges. And our next step is going to be adding calyxes. So I've got some gooseberry and spruce green mixed together with this Gumpaste. And I am just going to roll that out and roll it through the pasta machine to a number 5. So I'm just cutting this out with a large calyx cutter. This is just a classic kind of rose calyx cutter. And I only need 3, but I will always cut out 4 just in case I mess one up. So next, thinning those edges, just like we do with the petals, with a medium ball tool. Then you will cup each of those little petals, or whatever you call them, the calyx parts. And we're only going to need these 3, so I just threw the other one away. Add glue to all of the different sides. Then you'll thread those on just like you thread on the blossoms earlier. All the way up, and then I flip it over to see if there's any spots that I want to cover. If not, I just press it down wherever it is. And I think that's looking great. So just smooth it out, and then I'll let this dry overnight standing up. And I will repeat with the other flowers. I did not tape the stems here, but you can absolutely do that. I'll link to a video in the description box below and in the top corner, just showing you how to tape in case you don't know how with the floral tape. And thank you so much for watching this video. Please don't forget to subscribe if you do enjoy these sugar flower videos or the piping videos or anything cake related. And join me in my peony class, which is coming up really soon. We are also going to be having a 5-day sugar flower challenge, which I'm very excited about. We are going to be making different flowers every single day, and it's going to challenge you to use new techniques, but with the same tools, so you don't have to invest in a lot of stuff. And the details for everything will be in the description box below, so I will see you there.